Hello, Joe Biden's America, and this is the Bomb Squad, where much like Joe Biden's America, we take mediocrity and we try to see the good in it.
That was pretty good.
That's pretty good. We are talking about Stir of Echoes.
Haven't you ever heard about people being operated on when they're under hypnosis?
Why don't you hypnotize somebody?
Yeah, do me. Come on. What's the worst that can happen?
It's the 1999 feature film starring Kevin Bacon. It's about a guy who he goes to a party and his sister-in-law's a psychic, and like he's kind of teasing her about how hypnotism isn't real, and then the sister hypnotizes him and he wakes up and now he can see ghosts. And you also find out that his son has the same gift, but he doesn't need to be hypnotized, he can just see ghosts. And eventually he sees a ghost and he has to figure out what she wants.
Yeah, he's trying to kind of figure it out the whole time.
Yeah.
He's haunted, but he's not passively haunted or necessarily trying to run from it. He's trying almost as soon as he figures out what's happening to solve the mystery.
Well,
and I think that does make it more interesting.
Even after the first day, he's trying to figure out either how to turn it off or what the ghost wants, or even to see the ghost again, which is very unique in terms of being a protagonist. And I think it has a lot to do with Kevin Bacon's character. He's he works for the phone company, but he has a band that's kind of falling apart, even though he won't admit it. And he
Yeah, he's kind of a shitty guy. Because and this isn't actually a huge part of the plot, but at the very beginning, the wife is talking to her sister and is like, "Oh, I'm pregnant."
And you told her before you told me.
She's a witch. She took one look at me and guessed. Say something.
Bummer.
Something else.
Action is bummer, and then she's obviously pretty upset with him. And then they kind of talk about how he's like, "Oh, well, you should take some time off this time. I'm gonna try to put in more overtime, at the phone company." That kind of, it's a very he's kind of a rough blue collar guy, but it's
It is kind of,
he cares, but he's kind of a dick about it.
One of my favorite things about this movie, and I didn't really notice it until last night, is that this is a blue collar horror story or ghost story. There's no oh, welcome to Bly Manor. This is the ghosts of this 18th century Duke of Ferdinand. It's oh yeah, the ghost is a girl from down the block who she still has the 90s bracelets. That's one of the things that's good about the character work. She has a million bracelets on her hand.
Kevin Bacon knows right away that it's happening, and he doesn't even try to hide it. He is telling everyone who will listen.
Right.
That something's happening.
Which gets him in trouble a little later, but we'll talk about it.
Yeah. But when he figures out that Jake knows too, he is kind of pressing him for the info, because he's like, "No, obviously I'm not crazy," and very quickly, his wife too realizes he's not crazy. Although I think there is a little bit they kind of play it she's still somewhat in denial about it. She's just ignore it.
I can't get him more than 6 feet from the couch.
Why?
That's where she appeared to him.
I think the way they do it is they do it in a very realistic way where the wife believes that he sees something or that something's wrong with him, but she doesn't necessarily believe that it's ghosts. And so it's kind of how you would treat it, where it's yeah, I believe that you're seeing something, but also if you woke up tomorrow and told me that you were crazy, I wouldn't say no. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's kind of funny in the way, because I was thinking about this, and you don't really think about these things the first time you watch a movie, but kind of knowing what happens. There's a scene where you kind of get the most exposition about how it works, where Jake leads the mom into a graveyard. They're just playing, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
they're going for a walk.
Yeah, they meet this black cop, Neil the cop, and he kind of approaches them because he senses that the son also has the gift. He calls it the eyes. A little bit too much of a Shining setup, I feel, with this. But he gives the mom he's like, "Oh, have your husband meet me at this address." and she won't tell the husband. She goes herself, and he kind of like lays it out. It's like, well, no, something happened to trigger this in him, and now a ghost is after him, and he needs to figure out what the ghost wants, or it'll never leave him alone. You know?
Right.
Now, if she had actually told Kevin Bacon this, he would have he would have gone to this. He would have sought these people out. And I think it's almost like the movie needs him to not know that this group exists. And it's a pretty good scene too, because she kind of goes to this dank alley, you know, where they're kind of like hiding, and it's almost implied that it's very much this like kind of like ostracized group. They almost give the feeling of like these like kind of an outcast, drugged in type feel to it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like one of the things I like about it, again, going back to the working class, is that you don't see anyone clearly in the group. You just kind of see their figure and you see their you hear their voice, but it's very clearly like a young black guy in like kind of like baggy clothing, and then like a hippie guy, and it's like, yeah, that's kind of cool. That like, yeah, of course, people who see the ghosts aren't always going to be rich people. It's going to be like a regular hippie guy who smoked too much weed, or like, you know, like a young kid who doesn't understand what's going on. And so like, yeah, it's interesting like how they dress everyone up. Like even him, he's like a cop, but then when he answers the door, he's wearing like very like tribal clothing, you know?
Yeah, no, and I did like it, although it is almost strange in a sense that they solely use that scene for exposition, and then that group or that character never kind of comes into play. Like, and I'm almost like, oh, is there like a deleted scene? You know, it's one of those things where they would almost be too good at solving the crime, you know, because they know what's going on, and so you need like Tom, Kevin Bacon's character, to muddle through it.
And you know what? Now that you've mentioned that, it doesn't make sense why she doesn't tell Tom. Because, yeah, he's literally walking up to neighbors asking them about murders and shit.
Hey, Harry.
How you doing?
What do you know about that girl, Samantha Kozak?
And, like, and then
yeah,
one of the best things about Tom's characters is that he'll ask people, like, super creepy-ass questions. Like, he'll be like, oh, yeah, I've been thinking about that Samantha girl. And then they're like, why? And he's like, oh, you know. And it's like, that's not a good explanation, Tom. You're so bad at this, like, trying to act normal right now.
At a certain point, he goes like he doesn't know what to do, so he goes back to the sister to get hypnotized, and then to try to like get it to stop. And then he gets the message to dig, so he starts digging in the backyard. And then when his wife confronts him, and he's like, "This is the only important thing I've ever done." It's a really good scene because then she's like, you know, every time you say your life is shitty and you know you're boring and you're too ordinary, you're saying your family is shitty and boring and ordinary, and how do you think that makes me feel? You know, it's just kind of one of those like, it's like, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense that she would be just completely like done with this, you know?
Right. Like, yeah, and it's kind of like, it is kind of like, yeah, they bring it to the head just talking about ghosts, but it makes an important point because, yeah, every time, even before he gets hypnotized, Tom kind of talks about how he promised her like a real good life, and he doesn't feel like he's giving her one. And I think in his mind, he sees himself as a failure. And that scene kind of brings it home that Maggie says, well, if you're a failure, like your kid and your wife are kind of the byproducts of your life. So that would mean that we're part of the failure of your life, you know? And I think that's... It hits emotionally when you don't think it's going to. Because that scene is like one of the best scenes in the movie. Yeah. Like they're digging and like it shows Jake and he's also digging on his side, and Maggie's like, what are you doing? He's like, we're digging for bodies. And she's like, well, what is Jake doing? And he's like, Jake's helping.
Don't worry, he's okay. It's not over there.
But it's just like such a
like he's like not like he's like so shitty, but it's like he's trying to do the best he can as a dad while still going crazy.
Yeah, like that's one of my favorite things is how bad Tom is at like reassuring people or just like like making sure people are calm, you know? Like he does that multiple times where he like says something because he starts digging, and then he starts digging in the house. And like later his neighbors come, and we'll expand on this a little bit later because we have to, but like his neighbor goes, what are you doing? Why are you digging up my floors? Because like that's the landlord. And Tom goes, oh, there was a water main break, and the landlord goes, the water doesn't run under the house, and Tom goes, yeah, well, I know that now. It's like,
That's such a good, like, it is funny too, because it doesn't happen this way, but when his wife leaves, it's actually also, this is actually a pretty funny scene, because she's reading a letter from her brother saying, like, Nana's in the hospital, and then Tom's like, no, she's not, she's, never mind. And then
Yeah.
she gets a call, like, a
not
few
so.
minutes later that her grandmother's passed away. And then so she leaves to go to the funeral. She takes Jake with her. And then he's later calling her. He's like, nah, all the digging is done. And then as he's saying it, he walks past, like, the kitchen where he has literally destroyed, like, the wooden floorboards with, like, a pickaxe, you know?
yeah. The way I always saw it is his powers, the more he hangs out in the ghost world, the more his powers get defined. So he stops seeing, like, mistakes. Like, obviously the red flashing, it's not real, like, it kind of tells him where to go, but he has to, like, he has to figure it out more. And then as he goes along, they're kind of like then they just tell him to dig. Like, there's no, and then they, like, kind of tell him where to dig. So it's pretty good about, like, the way I saw it is that as he stays in the ghost world, his powers become more defined. Like,
It's like he's in a tunnel with a flashlight, but the light only comes on every once in a while. He gets a glimpse of something, but not enough to know what it is. Just enough to know it's there.
Jake, too.
Your son? Much better flashlight.
but yeah, so eventually he finds the girl, Samantha, who's been buried in the wall, and he touches her, and that's when he realizes that it was actually the neighbor's kids.
I just say too, like once he finally like starts, like when he digs it up, they almost do the thing where there's hints and hints, and then when he digs up and actually finds the body in the wall, Cask of Amontillado style, he touches her hand, and then he experiences the entire thing, and it's just completely unbroken, like the whole time. And then suddenly, just as she dies, it just smash cuts back to him, like gasping with like frost coming out of his mouth.
Yeah.
And it's such a good cut to like the reveal of, like, because you're so lost in trying to figure out what happened, that when like she dies and he gasps, it's like it kind of like jolts you back to reality. Such a good edit. This is such a good movie. It's not scary in the sense of like the first probably like third or half has a lot of like big scares in it, as he's being haunted. And after that, it's almost more of a thriller.
And that's
he's not scared by the ghosts anymore. He's trying to like help. And so it's, and I do kind of appreciate that it almost shifts on you. But if you told someone like, oh, let's watch a horror movie, and then they, didn't find it scary, you'd be like, well, it's not that kind of horror movie,
I think, well, and that's the thing, and I was actually going to bring this up when you mentioned Neil, is that I think one of the reasons that they don't bring Neil back is because that's kind of part of the horror part of the movie, and so it feels very like the Bagul scene that we always talk about, where they're explaining what Bagul is. And after that, yeah, the movie does have a genuine shift from like, oh, is this ghost gonna kill Tom, to how do I solve this ghost murder? Because that's clearly what Tom wants to do, once he figures out who the girl is. And so it does shift from being a ghost story to being a detective story in a way where it's not that it changes genres, it's that you find out as we learn more that this was always a detective story. Like, the ghost never really wanted to hurt Tom. It was just, if you see a ghost, even if she wants help, you're going to freak out because it's a ghost, And as someone, like, if you watch any of my movies, except for Borderland, it's very straightforward. But from Empty Space to the last ones, they both do the same thing where it's like, it's not that they change genres, it's that, once we get into it, we realize that it's not the type of movie we thought we were going into. And I always think that's an interesting way to have movies. To like kind of surprise the audience.
Yeah. Expectations.
Yeah, and it's one of my favorite things about it, because it's like, if you are someone who likes kind of ghost stories but you don't like horror films, this is definitely the movie for you. So Stir of Echoes, it's a good movie. I think you should watch it. It's on Hulu. It's underappreciated, and yeah, I just kind of got lost in the mix. But I think if people go back and discover it, it's worth discovering. Plus, I always like stories that are ghost stories and not stories about ghosts, But yeah, this has been the Bomb Squad. I don't know what we're covering next week. like and subscribe on our YouTube channel, and also like and subscribe on our podcast. We're on every podcast. I feel like the YouTube channel is kind of blowing up more than the podcast, but I don't know how to fix that problem.
You know what I say? Like or subscribe. Don't do both.
Yeah, don't do both. So we'll see you next time, and keep on bombing.